Children. Smoke or fire? Declan asked without looking at her. Children. Rue didn't answer. She was staring at the tree line, trying to figure out which direction they'd come from. Children. The wagon lurched over a buried root, and she grabbed the bench plank with both hands to keep from sliding off into the mud. Children. She was 23 years old, and she had just married a stranger in a courtroom that smelled like mildew and old tobacco. The ceremony took 4 minutes, she knew because she counted. Children. Her name was Rue Calloway, and 3 weeks ago she had a father, a home, and something resembling a future. Then the fever took Daddy in 6 days flat, and the bank sent a man in a good coat to explain, very politely, that the mortgage had been defaulted since February, and that she had until the end of the month to clear her belongings from the property. Children. She had $41, a trunk of clothes, and a talent for making bread that no one in Harwick, Tennessee seemed to need badly enough to pay for. Children. Then came the notice on the general store board, handwritten, blunt. Children. Woman wanted. Must be capable, not delicate. High country work. Marriage required. Inquire. D. Sherritt. Children. She had stood in front of that paper for a long time. A woman beside her read it over her shoulder and made a sound like she'd smelled something rotten. Rue pulled the notice off the board and put it in her coat pocket. Children. That was how she ended up on a wagon bench next to Declan Sherritt, heading into the Appalachian backcountry with everything she owned stuffed under a canvas tarp behind them. Children. He was not what she'd expected, though she wasn't sure what she had expected. He was somewhere between 30 and 40, children, with a jaw like a fence rail and hands so heavily calloused they looked carved from a different material than regular skin. Children. He wore a coat that had been repaired so many times along the collar and cuffs that it was more patch than original cloth. His boots were good, she noticed that, solid, oiled, built for serious terrain. Children. But everything else about him read as a man who had given up on appearances long ago and felt entirely comfortable with that decision. Children. He had shaken her hand in the courthouse, not tenderly, the way a man might take a woman's hand on a wedding day, but firmly, the way you'd confirm a business arrangement with someone you intended to hold to it. Children. Smoke or fire, he said again, still not a question. Children. Rue looked at the ridge above the tree line. There was a thin gray column rising against the overcast sky. Children. Fire, she said. Smoke would be flatter. Children. He made a small sound, something between acknowledgement and surprise, and clicked the horses forward. Children. They didn't speak again for 2 hours. Children. The road, such as it was, disappeared sometime in the early afternoon. What replaced it was a pair of rutted tracks through second-growth forest, barely wide enough for the wagon. Branches scraped the sides with a sound like fingernails on tin. The temperature had been dropping since noon, and now the air had that particular steel-edged quality that meant rain was 20 minutes away, give or take. Children. It came in 30. Not rain, sleet, tiny vicious pellets of it that stung Rue's cheekbones and collected in the creases of her coat. She had pulled her collar up and her hat brimmed down, and she sat rigid on the bench, refusing to lean into the discomfort of it. Children. Declan reached behind the bench without comment and dropped a canvas square across her lap. It was heavy and smelled like pine resin and saddle oil. She pulled it around her shoulders. Children. Thank you, she said. Children. He didn't respond. Children. By the time they made camp, a shallow overhang of limestone above a creek bend, barely enough to call shelter. Rue's hands were so stiff she couldn't work her coat buttons. She stood by the wagon and fumbled with them, her fingers doing nothing useful until she accepted that she was going to have to ask for help or sleep in her coat. Children. She turned around. Children. Declan was already watching her. He crossed over and, without ceremony, undid the buttons himself. His fingers moved quickly, efficiently. He peeled the wet wool off her shoulders and hung it from a wagon hook. Gildren. Don't put that back on wet, he said. You'll get sick. Gildren. She wanted to tell him she knew how hypothermia worked. She didn't. Gildren. Dinner was salt pork and johnny cakes and coffee, so strong it made her eyes water. They sat on opposite sides of a sputtering fire, the sleet ticking against the limestone above them. The silence had a specific texture to it, not hostile, but deliberate, like a man who had decided long ago that words cost something, and he wasn't going to spend them without reason. Gildren. How far? Rue asked finally. Her voice sounded strange to her, the first word she'd said in hours. Gildren. Day and a half. He turned his johnny cake over in the pan. If the creek hasn't jumped its banks. Gildren. And if it has? Gildren. He looked at her across the fire. His eyes were dark gray, steady, and entirely unreadable. Then 2 days. Gildren. She looked down at the johnny cake in her hand. It was gummy in the middle. She ate it anyway. Gildren. She lay awake that night, under a horse blanket and 2 quilts from her trunk, listening to the sleet shift to rain, and the creek begin to murmur louder. The cold got into her hips. Gildren. She thought about her father, how he used to leave his boots by the kitchen door. Gildren. How the house had smelled like coffee and sawdust and something specific to him that she could not name and would probably spend the rest of her life trying to find in other things and failing. Gildren. She pressed her eyes shut and told herself to sleep. Children. The creek had not jumped its banks, but it was close. Declan took them across at a ford 3 miles upstream from where the road would have crossed. The horses chest deep in brown churning water, the wagon bed getting wet despite the tarp. Rue sat with her feet pulled up on the bench and did not make a sound, though her heart was doing something alarming in her chest. For the full 8 minutes it took to cross. Children. When they reached the other side, Declan glanced at her. Gildren. You didn't scream, he said. Gildren. Was I supposed to? Gildren. He said nothing. He picked up the reins and moved the horses forward. Gildren. The terrain steepened through the afternoon, the trail winding up through stands of old hardwood, and then into pine, where the light changed quality entirely. Gildren. Going from gray gold to something more like dark green shadow. The wagon groaned on the switchbacks. Rue found herself gripping the bench with both hands on every turn. Gildren. Watching the drop on the outer edge of the trail with the focused attention of someone who very much wanted to continue being alive. Gildren. She was cold and her lower back hurt, and she was beginning to understand that the notice on the general store board had undersold the situation considerably. Children. What exactly does a woman do up here, she asked, as much to hear a human voice as to get an answer. Gildren. Cook, keep the house. Help with the pack animals when I need an extra pair of hands. Children. That's it? Gildren. That's a lot, he said, without inflection. Children, she supposed it was. Gildren. The light was going purple-gray behind the ridgeline when they crested the last rise. The trail leveled out onto a wide, flat shelf of land protected on 3 sides by the mountain. The pine thinned. She could see the sky again, the first stars appearing above the eastern ridge. Gildren. She was looking at those stars when Declan stopped the horses. Gildren. She looked down. Gildren. 40 yards ahead, set into the mountain's face like something that had grown there, were iron gates. Not rough-cut fence gates, not something a backwoods man would nail together from scrap lumber and field wire. These were forged gates, 8 feet high, mounted between 2 pillars of stacked fieldstone, with a crossbar and a heavy chain and a padlock the size of her fist. Children. The ironwork was intricate, branches and birds, running along the vertical bars with a precision that meant someone had paid for skill. Gildren. Beyond the gates, a stone path led through what had been a kitchen garden, gone to seed and buried in leaves, but clearly once intentional, clearly once loved. And beyond the garden, at the far end of the clearing, children. Rue lost the thought. Children. The house was built of river stone and chestnut timber, 2 full stories, plus a loft, with a covered porch running its entire width and deep-set windows that caught the last of the evening light and held it. There was a well house to the left, a woodshed to the right, with an impressive stack inside, and a barn behind, solid, sided, tin-roofed. A thin thread of smoke rose from the main chimney. Children. Rue sat very still on the wagon bench. Children. What is this? She said. It didn't come out as a question. Her voice had gone flat. Children. Declan was already climbing down. He walked to the gate, reached inside his coat, and produced a key. Children. Home, he said. Children. Whose home? Children. The padlock clicked open. He pushed the gate inward. Mine. Children. Rue didn't move. Children. The exhaustion of 2 days was still in her joints, the creek crossing still cold in her bones, the gummy Johnny cakes still sitting heavy in her stomach. She looked at the house. She looked at the man in the patched coat, holding the gate open like it was perfectly ordinary, like there was nothing to explain. Children. Something hot and furious uncoiled in her chest. Children. She climbed down from the wagon. Her legs held barely. She walked through the gate without looking at him, then stopped 3 feet past it and turned around. Children. You have this, she said. You have all of this, and you put a handwritten notice on a board in a general store asking for a woman who wasn't delicate. Children. He latched the gate behind them. Children. You could have hired a cook. You could have hired help. Children. I could have. Children. Then why? Children. Get inside, he said. You're shaking. Children. She was. Not just from the cold, though the cold was real and present and working on her steadily. She was shaking from something else, something that didn't have a clean name, a mix of exhaustion and fury, and the particular kind of humiliation that comes from being grateful for a buffalo blanket when the man sitting next to you owned a house with stone pillars and forged iron gates. Children. She went inside. Children. The interior was large and low-ceilinged in the way of houses built to hold heat, every surface solid and plain but well-made. Children. There was a stone hearth in the front room with a fire already banked. He had set it before they left, she realized, and a wood stove in the kitchen beyond, and beeswax candles on the mantel. Children. There was dust in the corners, a spiderweb across the upper window, the specific stillness of a house that had been without a woman for a while. Children. But the structure itself was sound, the floors level, the walls insulated with horsehair plaster, and not a breath of draft coming through the frames. Children. She stood in the front room and took it in. Children. Declan came in behind her, hung his coat on a peg by the door, and went directly to the kitchen. She heard him at the stove. The smell of coffee came through the doorway in minutes. Children. She went to the kitchen. Children. He set a mug in front of her, real coffee, not the scorched grain substitute half the territory drank. She wrapped both hands around it and felt something in her finally begin to thaw. Children. He sat down across from her at the kitchen table. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the last 2 days. Children. I need you to ask, Rue said. Whatever you're thinking about saying, just say it. Children. He looked at his own mug. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to speak. Children.
8 years ago,
he said, I found a vein of copper on this land. Spent 3 years working it, selling the ore through a broker in Knoxville who didn't ask questions. Built this house with what I cleared. He ran one thumb along the edge of the mug. Word travels, not fast up here, but it travels. Children. Rue waited. Children. I had a wife, he said, brought her here the proper way. Carriage from town, new furniture, a girl from the valley to help with the house. She was from a good family. Knew how to be pleasant. He stopped. Gildren, what happened? Gildren. She lasted 7 months. The isolation was too much, she said. The quiet was too much. She took the wagon to Greer's Crossing and wired her brother, and her brother came with a lawyer, and the lawyer had some papers that suggested she was owed considerably more than she'd arrived with. He looked up. The broker in Knoxville didn't keep my name out of it the way I'd paid him to. She'd found the ledger. Children. Rue set her mug down. Children. So you put up a notice, she said, for someone desperate. Children. For someone who could handle the mountain, he said, and his voice was careful, each word placed like a foot on uncertain ground. Someone who wouldn't come because of what was in the barn or what was on the deed. Children. You don't think desperate and capable are the same thing. Children. I think they can be, he said. I needed to see which one you were. Children. The room was quiet. Outside the kitchen window, the wind was picking up, moving through the pines in long waves. Children. The crossing today, Rue said. Children. He nodded once. Children. That was a test. Children. I needed to see if you'd fall apart. Children. I could have drowned. Children. The horses know that ford. You wouldn't have drowned. He paused. But you didn't know that. Children. Rue looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the creek, brown and churning and very cold. She thought about sitting rigid on the bench and not making a sound, not because she was brave, but because there was no alternative, and she had figured that out. Children, and if I'd screamed, she said. Children. Then I'd have taken you back to Harwick in the morning. Children. The word settled between them like a stone into still water. Children. She should have been angry. She was angry. She could feel it sitting under her sternum, steady and real. But the anger had company. She was warm for the first time in 2 days, and the coffee was real coffee, and the chair she was sitting in was solid and didn't wobble, and the fire in the front room was making a sound like something breathing steadily in sleep. Children. She picked up her mug. Children. Your Johnny cakes are terrible, she said. Children. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile, not quite, but the place where a smile might form if the muscle memory were there. Children. Probably, he said. Children. The first week was strange, the way new things are strange before they become ordinary. Children. Declan rose before dawn every morning and was out the door with a lantern. Before Rue heard him move, he was in the mine by the time the sky went gray, and back at the house by late afternoon, smelling of mineral dust and cold air. He washed at the pump outside regardless of the temperature, methodical and unhurried, and came in to eat whatever she had on the stove. Children. She cooked because it gave her hands something to do. She found the root cellar on the second day, massive, dug deep into the hillside. Children. Shelved with preserves and dried goods and crocks of salted meat that would last a winter and then some. She reorganized the kitchen methodically. Children. The way she'd always done with things that were not in their right places. She scrubbed the front room floor until the grit was gone from the grain. Children. She beat the rugs in the dooryard and hung them over the porch rail and let the cold air do what cold air did. Children. She was angry, still, not constantly, not loudly, but it was there, a steady low tone underneath everything. Children. He had built something real and quiet and good out here in the mountains, and he had hidden it inside a test she hadn't agreed to take, and she had passed without knowing she was being graded, and she didn't know yet how she felt about that. Children. On the 5th evening, she found a shelf of books in the room off the kitchen that he used as an office. She stood in the doorway and looked at them for a while. There were histories, a few novels with broken spines, a dictionary with penciled notes in the margins. Children. She took a novel and went to the front room. Children. She was 2 chapters in when Declan came down the stairs, which was unusual. He typically went to bed not long after supper. Children. He carried a lamp and set it on the table between the 2 chairs by the hearth. He sat down in the other chair. He didn't say anything. Children. After a moment he said, "What are you reading?" Children. She turned the cover toward him without speaking. Children. He looked at it. "Any good?" Children. "So far." Children. He set his lamp down, reached under the chair, and produced a small jar of something amber-colored that he set between them on the table. He got 2 tin cups from the sideboard and poured. Children. She looked at the cup. Children. "Apple brandy," he said. "I don't have anything better." Children. She took the cup. It burned clean going down the way good things did. Children. They sat with the fire and the wind in the pines for a while, not talking. Children. "I'm not sorry I did it," Declan said finally. Children. Rue kept her eyes on the fire. "I know you're not." Children. "But I think you deserve to know what you were crossing." Children. "You could have just told me." Children. "I thought about that." He turned his cup slowly in both hands. "I decided telling wasn't worth much. People say a lot of things before you've got any evidence of who they actually are." Children. Rue thought about her father, who had said many things about money and what he intended to do about the situation, right up until the situation resolved itself by killing him. She thought about the boarding house owner in Harwick who had said the work would be reasonable. Children. "That's not wrong," she said. Children. "I know it's not right either." Children. She looked at him. He was watching the fire. The lamplight caught the angles of his face, the particular quality of a man who had made decisions alone for a long time, and had the expression to show for it. Children. "The woman before," she said. "What was her name?" Children. A pause. "June." Children. "Did you love her?" Children. Another pause, longer. "I thought I did. I think I loved the idea that someone would come up here and decide it was enough." Children. Rue nodded slowly. She understood that. She understood wanting someone to look at what you had built and decide it was worth staying for. Children. "I'm not June," she said. Children. "No," he agreed, "you're not." Children. She took another sip of brandy and went back to her book. Children. 3 weeks in, the first hard snow came, not a dusting but a real storm, the kind that muffled the world and made the pines groan and turned the path to the woodshed into a matter of navigation. Rue spent 2 days working through the house, finding every draft, plugging what she could, with rolled rags and horsehair caulk she found in the barn. She moved the kitchen table closer to the stove. Children. She learned which floorboards creaked, which window latch needed lifting before it would close, which part of the upstairs got coldest soonest. Children. She learned the house the way you learned a person, not all at once, but by staying, by paying attention. Children. Declan watched this happen, she knew. She felt him watching, in the sideways way he had, not staring, just taking note. He had started talking more. Not much. He was not a man built for much, but in the evenings he would say things, small things, about the ore vein or the weather or what he had seen on the upper ridge that day. Children. Once she made a remark about the angle of the woodpile, how it was stacked inefficiently and shedding wood from the bottom, and he looked at her for a moment and then went out and restacked it. Children. On a Friday evening, 3.5 weeks after she had arrived, he came in from the mine earlier than usual. He set something on the kitchen table and stepped back. Children. It was a key ring, wrought iron, 2 keys on it. Children. Front gate and front door, he said. The snow will clear by April. The road to Greer's Crossing will be passable. He looked at the key ring, not at her. There's enough silver ore refined and stored in the lockbox in the office to set you up in town. A house, a year of living expenses while you find work, more than you'd need. Children. Rue looked at the keys. They were cold-looking, solid, unremarkable. Gildren, you're offering me a way out, she said. Gildren, I'm telling you one exists. He finally looked at her. You didn't agree to a test. You didn't agree to 2 days in the cold. You agreed to what was on the notice, and the notice didn't tell you enough. He stopped. That's on me. Gildren. Rue looked at the key ring on the table. She thought about Harwick, the mildewed smell of the courthouse, the boarding house owner's meaningful silences. She thought about $41 and a talent for bread nobody wanted. Gildren. She thought about the creek crossing, the horses chest-deep in cold water, her own hands white on the bench. Gildren. She thought about the books on the shelf in the office, the penciled notes in the dictionary margins, the apple brandy, and the 2 chairs by the fire. Gildren. She picked up the key ring. Gildren. The iron was heavier than it looked. Gildren. April's a long way off, she said. Gildren. Declan was very... Gildren. The root cellar's organized wrong, she said. The winter stores should be rotated by date, or you'll be eating preserved corn from 3 seasons ago before you get to the new stock. She set the key ring in her apron pocket, where it hung with a satisfying weight. I'll fix it this week. Gildren. He looked at her for a long moment. In the lamplight, his face did something she hadn't seen it do before. Not open, he was not a man who opened easily, and she suspected he never fully would, but present in a way he hadn't been quite present before, like someone stepping out of a doorway they'd been standing in for a very long time. Gildren. The road to the upper pasture gets iced over by January, he said, his voice careful and low. I'll need a second pair of eyes to lead the animals down before it sets. Gildren. Then show me the route before it ices. Children. All right. Gildren. She turned back to the stove and stirred the pot. He sat down at the table. Gildren. Outside, the snow came down steady and quiet, covering the garden and the stone path and the top rails of the iron gates, filing in the tracks of the wagon and the footprints from the pump and everything that had come before, laying the world down clean and still and waiting. Gildren. The keys stayed in her pocket. Gildren. That night after supper she went back to the front room, to the book and the fire and the 2 chairs, and after a while Declan came and sat in the other one, and he brought the apple brandy, and they sat with the storm pressing at the windows and the house holding steady around them, and neither of them said anything for a long time, because neither of them needed to. Gildren. I keep thinking about the moment Rue picked up those keys. Gildren. Not the gate, not the house, not even the man standing across from her in a kitchen that smelled like real coffee and old stone. Just the keys, cold iron, heavier than they looked, and the way she put them in her apron pocket instead of on the table, instead of in her trunk, instead of anywhere that would have meant she was still deciding. Gildren. That's the moment the whole story turns on, and it didn't come from nowhere. Gildren. Rue arrived with nothing. $41, a dead father's debts, and a talent for bread nobody in Harwick wanted badly enough to pay for. She didn't choose Declan because she saw something in him. She chose the notice on the board because the alternatives were worse. That's not a romantic beginning. That's a woman doing the math of survival and coming up with the only answer available. Gildren. But here's what I think about when I think about Rue. She crossed that creek without screaming, not because she wasn't afraid. The water was brown and fast and very cold, children, and she had no reason to trust the horses or the man holding the reins or any of it. She crossed it because she understood, somewhere below the fear, that falling apart wasn't going to change the water level. Children. That's a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, it just holds. Children. Declan was wrong to run the test the way he ran it. He knew that eventually, admitting it out loud, sitting at that kitchen table, pushing a key ring across the wood, took something from him. Children. It takes a particular kind of honesty to say, I built something good, and I've also done harm in protecting it. Most people never get there. They just keep defending the method because the method worked, children, and they can't separate those two things. Children. What I find myself returning to is the cause and effect of the whole thing. June left because she came for the comfort and stayed until it cost her something. Children. Rue stayed because she came with nothing and built something anyway. The root cellar reorganized, the drafts plugged, the floor scrubbed down to the grain. Children. She didn't do those things to earn her place. She did them because she was someone who fixed what was in front of her, regardless of whether the house was technically hers yet. Children. That's character showing itself before anyone's watching. Children. And Declan, for all his damage, recognized it. That's not nothing. It takes a certain quality of mind to see clearly through your own fear. Children. To look at someone and say, this is different when everything in your experience has taught you to expect the same. He'd closed himself off from judgment after June. Children. And he was right that the isolation had made him hard, and the hardness had made him unfair. But he didn't stop there. He kept enough of himself open to notice when he was wrong. Children. I think that's what this story is actually about. Underneath the stone house and the iron gates and the winter that buries everything. Children. It's about what happens when two people who have both been burned by trusting wrong decide to try again anyway, not with speeches, not with promises, but with small, repeated actions. A restacked woodpile. Children. A corrected root cellar. Apple brandy and 2 tin cups by a fire neither of them started alone. Children. The snow came down that last night and covered everything that had happened before. And they sat in those 2 chairs and didn't need to say anything because the doing had already said it. Children. That's not luck. That's the result of 2 people who refused to quit on themselves, even when quitting would have been easier, even when staying cost something real.